Get this, adults with financial literacy skills have 82% more wealth than those who don't. From swimming lessons to piano classes, us parents invest in so many things to enrich our kids' lives. But are we investing in their future financial success? With Greenlight, you can teach your kids financial literacy skills like earning, saving, and investing. And this investment costs less than that after-school treat. Start prioritizing their financial education and future today with a risk-free trial at greenlight.com/Wondery. Greenlight.com/Wondery.
Bombas makes the most comfortable socks, underwear, and T-shirts.
Warning, Bombas are so absurdly comfortable you may throw out all your other clothes.
Sorry, do we legally have to say that?
No, this is just how I talk, and I really love my Bombas.
They do feel that good. And they do good, too. One item purchased equals one item donated.
To feel good and do good, go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
The Prosecutors Podcast is brought to you by Progressive. Progressive helps you compare direct auto rates from a variety of companies so you can find a great one, even if it's not with them. Quote today at Progressive.com to find a rate that works with your budget. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations.
In 1973, the New York City Police Department created a hostage negotiation team.
He's not up against the gun. He's up against the man's mind.
When you're defusing a human bomb, it's the same as when you're taking apart a real bomb. If you skip a step, it's going to blow up right in your face.
Talk to Me tells the high-stakes true story of the world's first hostage negotiation team. It changed policing forever. Talk to Me.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, we conclude our look at the death of Tamla Horsford. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my majestic co-host, Alice.
Majestic. Gosh, that's like so nice. Someone must have given you that word, Brett.
You know, somebody probably did, but I didn't write down who it was. I'm just going to claim it for myself because you are royalty in my eyes. Alice, you are a queen.
Hardly. So I am really glad to get to talk to you because I've been flying all over. In fact, I've been in Texas, one of the greatest places on earth. Yay, shout out to all our Texans. And it was so fun. I think every minute of the day was filled up with, hanging out or meeting up with people that I hadn't seen in a long time. But it's so good to be back home. And just so you guys all know, I got off the plane 10 hours ago. And I texted Brett and I was like, we have to record tonight. Because it's been a long time.
I was like, is Alice going to want to record? She's been traveling, probably not. And then it's like, boom.
Absolutely.
Alice is pushing it. So it's like, okay,
absolutely.
well, I guess I got to
get your act
pull
together.
myself off the couch.
All to say is thanks for being so nice to me because I am a little bit tired, but I was also really excited to get to record with you. And, now that I think about it, the reason I'm tired is I woke up at 4 a.m. to catch my flight. That's pretty early.
That's a good reason.
That is
That's
pretty
a good
early.
reason. Yeah.
But all to say, we are here to talk about Tamla.
We are here to talk about Tamla, but I want everybody to take a moment to just admire how dedicated you are to this show that you're recording tonight. So thank you, Alice. This is why we love you. But we are back to talk more about Tamla Horsford. I am sure there's been a lot of discussion on the gallery and Reddit and other places about this case. This is a case that is bizarre and strange and really divides people. And as we said in the last episode, is it an accident? Is it murder is sort of the question. And we went through the timeline last time. We listened to the 911 call. We talked a little bit about the initial police reports. Today, we're really going to get into this case and come to a conclusion at the end. And hopefully, we'll be able to shed some light on what actually happened in this very strange case.
Indeed. And so we talked about a lot of different things yesterday. Remember, we listened to the 911 call. We talked about how she was found and that she was described as being stiff, really, from the get-go on the 911 call. Well, this is kind of all after the fact, right? We find her after she's been apparently dead for some time. So we're trying to retrace the steps of the night before and just get to know Tamla a little bit better to try and figure out what happened. How did she end up face down dead in the backyard in a completely just kind of run-of-the-mill party that was of basically a bunch of moms and dads getting together to watch a football game. So let's talk about Tamla's smoking, because according to people at the party, Tamla smoked a lot. Throughout the night, she would go out on the elevated back porch and smoke. Remember, that back porch is kind of the main floor, but because there's a basement, it's 15 feet up. And so she would go out many times throughout the night. People saw her go out, and that was one of the last places someone saw her go before she was not seen again till the next morning. Now, most of the time, Tamla smoked cigarettes, though on occasion she would smoke marijuana. Jean asked her not to smoke marijuana as her boyfriend was a pretrial services officer, and she was worried about his reaction and probably just generally, if you work for the court, you're supposed to report, any sort of breaking of the law. And so this makes sense that she would not want Tamla to smoke around him.
And that might be weird to some of you who live in places like California or Washington, D.C. or Colorado, but in Georgia, marijuana is still very illegal. So the fact that you have it is, it's not like it's a big deal, but it's a bigger deal than it might be in some other places.
Right. Now, it's not just that Tamla smoked a lot. She was actually the only person at the party who smoked cigarettes. The next morning, an unlit cigarette and a lighter was found laying on the porch floor, and it matched the brand smoked by Tamla, which is consistent if she was the only person at the party who smoked cigarettes.
And this is a piece of evidence that goes one way or the other. You guys might remember we listened to the 911 call. Jose actually mentions this on the 911 call. He says, "I see a cigarette, I see a lighter." And it's Jose who discovers it. The innocuous way to look at this is, that's Tamla's. She went out there to smoke. There was some sort of accident. If you think this is murder, however, this is part of the cover-up. So the lighter and the cigarette conveniently end up out there, and Jose is selling the story during the 911 call. And the whole idea is, this must have been an accident when she went to smoke. And what you think happened, this will cut one way or the other. But it is kind of interesting how this piece of evidence, it's not as definitive as maybe you would like it to be. You would like it to be definitive, but because we have unreliable narrators here, or maybe unreliable narrators, they may not be. That's the crazy thing. If everybody's telling the truth, this fits perfectly. If everybody's not telling the truth, this fits perfectly. It's a really interesting piece of evidence that can fit either theory, the conspiracy theory that there was a murder or the accident theory. Now, one piece of evidence that cannot be denied is Tamla's tox screen. Though I say that, people do kind of deny it. We're going to talk about that in a second. When Tamla's tox screen was done at the time of her autopsy, she was found to have a blood alcohol level of 0.238, which is very high. She also had traces of THC, which is consistent with her smoking marijuana, and a drug for anxiety, Xanax, was also found in her blood. One thing to remember is that marijuana actually intensifies the effect of alcohol. Not sure exactly what effect Xanax has on you when you've been drinking, but I would think it probably has a pretty significant one since, marijuana and alcohol are both depressants. I believe Xanax is as well. It would make sense since it's a drug for anxiety. So you got a lot of drugs interacting here that would be having the same effect on Tamla. For just your information, you guys may recall the Diane Schuler case that we did way back, the something's wrong with Aunt Diane story. Her BAC at the time of her death was 0.19. So Tamla's is significantly higher than hers. And blood alcohol level is one of those things where the higher it gets, the more it affects you, if that makes sense. So if you've had one beer, another beer takes you from about 0.2 to about 0.4. The effect on you is not going to be that great. But as you're moving up, the higher you get, the more this matters. It's not quite sort of a geometric or growth here, but it's significant that her BAC is almost 0.5 higher than Diane Schuler's. And obviously Diane Schuler was she was really kind of drunk out of her mind, as we talked about in that case. So this is very high. So at 0.238, you can expect vomiting, you can expect blackouts. Those are very common. Coordination is all but non-existent. Falls are likely. When you see someone who is very, very drunk, this is about where you would expect their BAC to be.
I know that everyone reacts to alcohol differently, and a 0.08 BAC for Brett might be very different for me, but a 0.238, I think what we can expect is it's undeniable to someone who's unaffected with other substances to recognize that she's had a lot of alcohol. I think it's almost impossible at that level to act completely normal, be able to hold a regular conversation and not have kind of your head nodding, rolling back, because your body is honestly trying to stay alive at this point from all that alcohol.
Another good marker is 0.08, which is the legal amount that you can drive with in most states other than Utah, where it's 0.05. And that's just significant only because there's a reason that you set that limit, because at about 0.08, your ability to coordinate, to think clearly, to do the things that you need to do to operate a vehicle are starting to be impaired. This is obviously about 3 times that, and it's significant. And like Alice said, your body wants you to go to sleep. That's the reason blackouts happen. Number one, to stop you from drinking anymore. But number two, just because, like everything else, when you're asleep, your body can really focus on whatever it needs to focus on, which in this case is removing the alcohol from your body. So if you assume an increase of about 0.02 per alcoholic drink, which is a little higher than it actually is. It's more like 0.17 or 0.017 typically, but 0.02 is a good one to use, because that way, it's 4 drinks. You have 4 drinks, you shouldn't drive. You really shouldn't drive if you had less than that, but nevertheless. Tamla would have consumed at least 12 drinks that night, and probably more, given that the body processes about a drink an hour. Now, according to witnesses at the party, Tamla was the only person to drink from that tequila bottle that she brought. When the bottle was examined, it was about 1/8 full. So if she was really the only person drinking it, she basically drank the entire bottle. We don't know exactly how big it was. I don't think it was a handle. I think it was probably more like a fifth. Fifth's the kind of thing you would buy in Mexico to take home and give to a friend. If she actually drank almost a fifth of alcohol, that's a lot. That is a lot of tequila. I love tequila. I can drink tequila like it's going out of style. If I drank that much tequila, I would probably be on the floor. So maybe it was a smaller bottle than a fifth. Maybe it was a pint. I don't know. But whatever it was, we know she drank a lot because her alcohol, the level is so high. Now, people will dispute this. And it always surprises me when people dispute this kind of stuff, because this is like the only hard evidence we have, right? But people will dispute this, and they'll point to the fact that other people at the party said she did not appear to be that intoxicated. And you hear that over and over again. There are 2 things that I would say about this. The first thing is everybody at that party was drinking. They might not have been drinking tequila. I know Jean was drinking vodka. A lot of the other women were drinking wine. If you look at a picture from the party, everybody's drinking. When you are drinking, you do not have as good a sense of how drunk other people are. In fact, they will often seem like they are not drunk. It's only when you're the guy who's not drinking or the gal who's not drinking and you're at the party that you realize just how drunk everybody else is. Like I gave up drinking for Lent once, and it was an eye-opening experience, because it's good not to have people like that at the party, because you don't want people to actually remember everything that happened. But in any event, most of them were probably drinking, so their ability to tell you just how drunk she was, probably not that high. Second, it's always funny to me how we assume people are telling the gospel truth when they tell us something that sort of fits with our theory, and we assume that they're lying when they tell us anything else. And here people act like this must be the gospel truth. She was completely sober. And it may be that people at the party want to believe that Tamla wasn't outwardly drunk. And why would that be? Because they feel guilty about what happened to her. If this is an accident, if this was an accident, you would feel bad about the fact that you didn't step in. you would feel bad about the fact that she was stumbling around drunk and you did nothing to help her. You let her go out on that deck and she fell to her death. And you would feel like that might be your fault. And so it wouldn't be that surprising if in your mind you're like, well, she wasn't that drunk. Seems like she wasn't that drunk. That's the first thing. Second thing, if you murdered her and you wanted everybody to believe that she fell off the deck, you'd probably say she was stumbling around drunk. So it is interesting that most people who have commented on Tamla have said she didn't look that drunk, but I don't really think we can take that for much other than either people don't know or that's just what they want to believe.
Yeah, especially on that second point, all the factors that could be going into why people say she didn't appear that drunk other than lying. So there's the guilty aspect, but also remember, these people they are friends with each other, but they are friends through association of basically their sons playing football together. They are not, high school friends or sorority sisters. So they're close enough to get together for a night of drinking and, a sleepover, but they're not like the best of friends. So it's possible that when you see someone look like that, it's embarrassing, right? It's embarrassing when you're in your 40s. It's embarrassing at any point in your time, but like at any point in your life. But sometimes you don't want to stare directly at someone because you're like, yeah, they've definitely been overserved. But like, why embarrass them by focusing in on it? And so maybe everyone kind of turns a blind eye a little bit. And also, you may not know her that well, and you assume someone else at the party must know her better, and they'll be the one to take her aside and, try to put her to sleep or maybe even bring her home. We see this often when we go out to bars. Like, we kind of look around. If we see, it's usually a girl, a woman, if she seems very drunk, we kind of look a little concerned because we don't want her to be taken advantage of by, someone. But we kind of all look around and think, and we'll ask, like, are you with her? Do you know her? Are you going to take care of her? Because it is kind of a personal thing to go put someone to bed or tell them, you should really stop. And so it may just be that everyone kind of thought, well, someone else will take care of it because that's an embarrassing thing. Our sons are friends. I don't want her to feel like she has something to be embarrassed about the next time we're at practice together. And anyways, I don't know her that well. There's about 10 other people at this party. Someone else must know her better. So it could be something as innocent as that. Now, the talk screen, it's really funny, Brett, that you say that's all we really have, like hard evidence, and yet there's so much in dispute or maybe questionable that people want to throw, questions at. Something else that showed up in the talk screen is very interesting. Remember, Xanax showed up on her talk screen, but Tamla didn't have a prescription for Xanax. So where did she get it? Now, one of the ladies at the party did have Xanax, though she swore she never shared it. But police soon found a text from her to another woman where she was sharing her Xanax. So it seems clear that this woman probably did share it with Tamla. If Tamla didn't have her own prescription of Xanax and there happened to be someone there with Xanax, we don't know for sure, but Xanax is one of those drugs that it's not the same as, say, sharing an opioid, or as some people may think of it. So they may not think it's that big of a deal. Oh, it'll just help you calm down. Of course, you can have one of these. It's not like I'm giving you some, Schedule II, which is the most highly regulated or controlled substance to get you high. It's really to do the opposite, to get you calm so you can just relax an evening with your friends as opposed to worry about all the other things that you have going on. And it doesn't surprise me that that woman with the Xanax prescription told police she didn't share it, because it doesn't matter if it's a Xanax. As long as it's a prescription drug, it is illegal to give it to someone who is not supposed to be in possession of it, no matter what scheduled drug it is. So I would expect that woman to say, of course, I didn't share it. And this opens another question. The marijuana. Do we really believe that no one smoked marijuana with Tamla? That Tamla was the only one going outside and smoking a joint all night? No one joined her, that she was, you'd have to believe that she was being reclusive because no one's going to join her out there to smoke or not partake in it. Now, it's possible Tamla was the kind of person to whip out pot at someone else's house in a group of women she barely knew in a place where it was illegal to smoke it. Or maybe the later statements by the group that she and she alone was smoking pot was just a convenient reinterpretation of what actually happened. Because you can imagine if this was just a fun night of watching football, drinking, and if everyone was smoking a little bit of pot, but someone ends up dead, maybe it's better not to mention that later, that you guys were all smoking pot.
And let me just say, if everybody had been drug tested that was at that party the next day, I'm going to go out on a limb and say a chunk of them, if not all of them, would have tested positive for marijuana. I think it's just, it goes back to what we said the last episode. People, look, you guys, if you worked the jobs that Alice and I worked, one thing that would become very apparent to you very quick is everybody lies. Everybody lies. And they lie about things. They might not even realize they're lying. They may just think they're telling their version of the truth or whatever. But you cannot interview someone who was close to a crime and they not at least minimize their own involvement. It's a natural thing to do, to distance yourself from the thing, particularly if you're otherwise perfectly innocent, right? It's just what people do. And this is a group of middle class, pillars of society, soccer moms, in this case, football moms, in a little town, in a little county in Georgia. They are there to have fun and relax. There is no way that Tamla was just smoking pot by herself. That is so crazy and absurd. I've been to a lot of parties. I've been to a lot of parties where people were smoking pot. I've never been to a party where there was one person smoking pot. I have never been to that. I've been to parties where it kind of divided up, and those of us who like to drink would go off to sort of one part of the party, and the people who want to smoke pot would go off to the other part of the party. But I have never been to a party where only one person was smoking pot, particularly in a situation like this where it's not, maybe if it was their home, right? And they wanted to do it and nobody else wanted to. But it is beyond believability that she was the only one smoking pot. And I think you sort of see what was happening here. Everybody was doing this, and at the end of the day, they felt like they had to kind of cover it up. That part, at least.
And here's the thing that doesn't make any sense. If, in fact, Tamla was the only person smoking pot, and Jan really told her, hey, my boyfriend is a pretrial services officer, like, you really can't smoke around him. Why wouldn't she just say, you can't smoke? Like, you're the only person smoking. Please just don't smoke here. Like, go home and smoke, or like, just don't do it here. That would be a lot more, you can imagine that scenario much better rather than her coming out and being like, hey, don't smoke in front of him, And then she would be like, okay, it's even more reclusive. She has to like hide and go smoke by herself. That doesn't make any sense, especially if it's one person. You would just be like, just smoke at another time. But if everyone were smoking, you can imagine we're just all having fun. It's not a big deal. This is not a big deal at all. We're just blowing off some steam after a long week.
And look, I don't smoke marijuana, but my understanding is marijuana is not like cigarettes. It's not like you have some sort of overwhelming urge. She just had to smoke it, like cigarettes often can be. And I think you're 100% right, Alice. She wouldn't have any THC in her body if this were the case, because she would have pulled out the joint. She would have said, anybody want to smoke some pot with me? They would have said no. Jean would have been like, hey, cop downstairs, let's not do this. And she would have been like, oh, okay. And that would have been the end of it. It's just the notion of her standing out on the back deck smoking a joint is so absurd. It did not happen that way. There's no way it happened that way. And I think that's one of the reasons this case, people get a funny feeling about it. And they think the reason they get a funny feeling about it is because there was a murder, and maybe there was. But I think it's also possible that the reason they get a funny feeling about it is because they are being lied to. They're being lied to by these people, and this is one of the ways. They're being lied to about the marijuana, the Xanax. Oh, the lady's like, I would never share my Xanax. And then the cops pull a text message off her phone where a lady's like, hey, that Xanax really helped me. Can I have another one? It's like, oh, you'd never share your Xanax, except here you did. So I think there were people taking Xanax, there were people smoking marijuana, there were people drinking, and then Tamla ends up dead, and people are like, oh my God, this is all our fault. We're going to get sued. We're going to get arrested. Just say it was only her. She was the only one smoking. It was just her. That's what happened.
And don't mistake our like passionate view of what may or may not have happened as an indictment on what happened that night. Because if you were to tell me that a bunch of football moms got together on a Friday night to watch football and ended up drinking a lot and smoked a little bit of pot and like someone took someone else's Xanax. In fact, I think, unfortunately, I think someone's always taking someone else's Xanax in any group of people that you're around. I'm not saying that's okay. In fact, like we prosecute those sorts of cases, but it's one of those drugs that people don't actually think of as being a dangerous drug. It is dangerous, by the way, to share your Xanax with someone else. So just know that to be the case. But I think, prevailing thought in general is like, it's just for anxiety. It's not going to hurt anybody. So it's not this, it's almost like sharing Tylenol as opposed to sharing hydrocodone. And so if you were to tell me a bunch of soccer moms or football moms that I know got together and smoked a little bit of pot and drank, and somebody took someone else's Xanax, I'd be like, yeah, that probably happened. No big deal. That's the thing, is this is pretty ordinary. It's that something terrible happened, and I think people started saying inconsistent stories with what the facts show is why you get a hinky feeling about it.
And that's 100% right, what Alice said. The reason this is so obviously not true is because it's just not that big a deal that that's what they were doing. And they were obviously doing it. And I just got to tell you guys, it's hard to know when someone's lying. People are always like, how do you tell if somebody's lying? Is it by the way they look, or are they sweating, or they lick their lips, or all this other stuff? It's hard to tell when someone's lying about a lot of things. When you know someone's lying is when they tell you something that is so obviously out of character with the way people act just in life. And you see that all the time. And this goes back to the minimizing. We interview people, we're doing investigations, and we've got our agents, and we identify people we want to talk to, and we bring them in, or we go to them and we ask them questions. And there's always a point where you ask them something and they give you some answer and you're just like, that's not what happened. You didn't do that, or you didn't really think that. Come on, nobody would think that, right? But they're telling you that because it puts them in the best light. And I think that's what you have here. You have people who this really bad thing happened, and they want to put themselves in the best light by presenting themselves as, well, we would never do that. That was all her. And that's probably why that happened to her, because she was doing that thing she shouldn't do. And honestly, you could say that whether she was murdered or killed, or whether it was an accident, because if she was a murder, they want it to look like an accident. So it's good to have her be the only person who's engaging in all these risky behaviors. Of course, she's the one who had the accident, right? But in reality, they were all doing it, and I just don't have any doubt about that. So let's talk about the autopsy, because it's pretty dramatic. There's a lot of wounds here, and this is one of the things that makes people think, I just don't know about this. So according to her autopsy, her right wrist was dislocated and had scrape wounds on it. Her left shin was bruised, and her right wrist, I think, is the broken one, and that was where the bone caused that sort of bleeding that was mentioned in the 911 call. Her left shin was bruised, and her right shin was lacerated. These are the wounds that made the one officer think that she had tripped over that metal grating that separated the sort of gravel patch from the grass. She had small abrasions on 2 of her fingers that were likely caused by the fall, as well as small scrapes to her forehead, nose, and left eyelid. Note that there's no real defensive wounds here. None of these wounds really feel like defensive wounds. They feel more like wounds that you could get when in a fall. One of Tamla's cervical vertebrae was fractured, though apparently not seriously enough to cause damage to her nervous system, though we know from talking about the Ellen Greenberg case that can be a little controversial. The autopsy revealed no evidence of rape or other sexual assault. And because there was no evidence of sexual assault, no rape kit was prepared. This is something that's criticized sometimes by people who look at this because they're like, why wasn't there a rape kit? That would tell us so much. But the thing is, you got to remember, rape kits, there's a backlog on those. We want to do rape kits when there's some evidence of sexual assault. So in a situation where it looks like an accident and there's no evidence of sexual assault, the chance of actually doing a rape kit is much, much lower. And you can imagine why they wouldn't do it. Do we wish we had it now? Probably. That would tell us something. I think it would probably have come back negative in any event, but nevertheless, no rape kit was prepared. So the damage to Tamla's head is severe. It resulted in a hemorrhage on her brain of about 150 milliliters of blood. The fall also caused a laceration to her heart, resulting in hemorrhaging into the area around the heart. And it's interesting, people don't really know what all falls can do, but when you hit the ground after falling from some height, it doesn't just damage the exterior. It doesn't just break your bones. There's force, traumatic force that's going all through your body. And oftentimes when you see people, like a concussive effect of a bomb, for instance, they'll often talk about if you're near a bomb, your insides are like liquefied, right? Because of all that energy that's going into you. And that's what you're seeing here. When she hits the ground with such force that it causes this laceration to her heart, and that causes hemorrhaging around the heart, which would have also killed her. She also has multiple blunt force trauma to her head, and this is something people found interesting. sort of if you fall, wouldn't you just hit your head once? I don't really know the answer to that. I wish we had a pathologist on this show at times, but in any event, that is what it says. Now, despite that, the medical examiner who created this autopsy and noted these multiple injuries does conclude that all the injuries are consistent with those from a fall, though, as I said, people question, could you get all of these injuries, particularly the multiple traumas to the head, from a single fall?
Yeah, and you can imagine why that is. Full blunt force trauma means the way they're located, it's hard to get them all at once from a fall because of the directions that they are on. And that's a pretty stark autopsy. Like that, I mean, I think the only kind of solace you can take is that she was probably very, very drunk when this happened and hopefully did not suffer too long, and that the hemorrhaging hopefully kind of just knocked her out and she was pretty much unconscious as she lay there dying. But this is a lot of trauma, and I don't even know. I mean, it's possible if she had gotten help right away, she could have been saved, but it sounds like it was quite the fall to cause that laceration of the heart. Now, we talked about her wrist. Remember during the 911 call, Jose is asked if he sees any blood. He says he sees blood on Tamla's wrists and speculates that maybe she cut her wrist. Now, it will turn out to be the result of a compound fracture. Some have found this to be unusual, but based on the 911 call, it's obvious that Jose is trying not to move the body. It's unlikely he would have a great view of her wrists from the way she was lying. So I think all this is, and we talked about this when we were listening to the 911 call together, it does sound like he's kind of standing at a distance. Everyone's kind of standing at a distance because there's still some people left from the party trying to kind of like peer over and give the best description and being very hesitant to make any movements of her body.
What's interesting is this has a very similar feel to the Ellen Greenberg case. In the Ellen Greenberg case, it also felt like her fiance was describing what he was seeing from a distance, that he wasn't up on her, which was unusual in that case because he supposedly was. Here, I do think they were describing it from a distance. I don't think they wanted to get particularly close. I think Jose knew we don't want to contaminate this scene. Now, he says this, and he's been criticized for it because people have said, how dare you say she tried to commit suicide? That's ridiculous. And I don't know. Once again, it's a 911 call. If it's an accident, dude's processing it as he goes. You could imagine him sort of making this mistake. But I think it's pretty obvious. She didn't cut her wrist. This kind of break isn't that surprising. The one thing that's weird about it is where she is. Remember, she basically, it's as if she just falls face first onto the ground, unconscious. I mean, her arms to the side. So there's no evidence of her bracing herself. So obviously the broken wrist would make sense if she were bracing herself. But it doesn't really seem like there is any bracing. And because of that, there are people who think, look, this is a defensive wound. She's trying to defend herself from a beating and somehow her wrist gets broken. This is difficult for people to understand. And that's what's interesting about this, because on the one hand, you have the theory of the police is that she fell from the deck. Maybe she was even sitting on the deck or standing on the deck. And by the deck, I mean the railing. Standing on the railing, which would be weird. And she falls. And that's how she died. And that's how she got all these wounds. But once again, she doesn't brace herself. She manages to fall. I mean, it's like, in a cartoon or something almost, where, Wile E. Coyote accidentally drops the mallet on his own head. And he just sort of like a tree, just falls straight over, right? I mean, that's kind of what you imagine is how this happened. And yet it's supposed to have happened from a height. How is that possible? What about this injury? So there are some definite inconsistencies in the wounds and in how her body was found.
Right, but that's a good point about the kind of defensive wounds. The autopsy didn't show kind of the, DNA under her fingertips as if she were fighting someone else off. And the placement of her body does seem like she fell and stayed there as opposed to someone moving her, as we suspected perhaps in the Ellen Greenberg case. And the other thing that I think is interesting is no defensive wounds also goes along with why they didn't do a rape kit, right? There was no sign of rape, and there was no sign that she was being attacked in that manner or that she was trying to fight it off as well. So the question then, because there are a lot of people still left, about six people or so left at this party in the morning when they call 911. Why didn't anyone try to save Tamla? So one question asked by friends and family is why no one tried CPR and why no ambulance came for Tamla. based on the autopsy, the answer seems pretty clear. Tamla was dead, and she'd been dead for hours. And how the story is told is that Jean's aunt basically walked outside, saw Tamla, assuming from afar, and immediately knew she was dead. That's a pretty big assumption. When you see someone stiff or still, your first thought may not be that they're dead. So sure that you wouldn't run to try and call for an ambulance or attempt CPR if you know how to do that, or find someone who knows how to do CPR. There are other people in the house. And so I do think that maybe it was so obvious that she was in fact dead for quite a while, which is why everyone reacted the way in which they did. But even if they had tried to save her, I think it's pretty clear medically there was no saving to be done. She had been gone for several hours by the time she was found. The Prosecutors Podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming, like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking, and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them.
So give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy. All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverage you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at Progressive.com to join the over 27 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. Alice, it's been a tough time for everybody. Over the last couple years, you've had COVID, you've had economic distress, prices are going up. It just seems like things are hard. And sometimes you just need someone to talk to, and that's where BetterHelp can come in. Life doesn't come with a user manual. So when it's not working for you, it's normal to feel stuck. Therapists are trained to help you figure out the cause of challenging emotions and to help you learn productive coping skills, which makes therapy the closest thing to a guided tour of the complex engine called you. And BetterHelp has connected over 3 million people with licensed therapists. It's convenient, secure, and accessible anywhere, 100% online.
Brett, I'm glad that we're talking about this very serious issue because everyone deserves to feel their best, and BetterHelp makes it easier to get started. As the world's largest therapy service, they've matched millions of people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists available 100% online. All the benefits of in-person therapy, plus it's more convenient, more accessible, and more affordable. There's no waiting rooms, no traffic, and no endless searching for the right therapist. Get unstuck with BetterHelp. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/prosecutors. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/prosecutors. We've got a very different kind of sponsor for this episode, The Jordan Harbinger Show, a podcast you should definitely check out since you're a fan of high-quality, fascinating podcasts hosted by interesting people. The show covers such a wide range of topics through weekly interviews with heavy-hitting guests, and I think you guys are going to love the True Crime Starter Pack. You can learn about Billy McFarland, from Fyre Fest fiasco to federal prison, and also about the secret life of an American art forger.
Guys, we have been talking about the Jordan Harbinger Show for a while, and if you haven't started listening to it yet, why not? It is a podcast that covers a lot, but one constant is Jordan's ability to pull useful pieces of advice from his guests. We promise you'll find something useful that you can apply to your own life. We really enjoy this show, and we think you will as well. Search for The Jordan Harbinger Show. That's HARB as in boy, IN as in Nancy, GER on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
On a winter night in a small community near Denver, Colorado, Jim Matthews arrived home late. He expected to find his 12-year-old daughter who'd been dropped off after a Christmas concert. But when he called out, "Hi, Jonelle," the house was eerily quiet. His daughter's shoes were on the floor, but she was gone. And it would be 35 years before she would be found, dead. after the discovery of Jonelle Matthews' body in 2019, the police turned their attention to a man who had told law enforcement years ago that he knew something, but they dismissed him. The man did seem obsessed with the case, but is that all he was? A true crime fanatic or a killer? Now, a jury will decide if Jonelle's murderer was hiding in plain sight the entire time. Wondery and Campside Media's podcast, Suspect, is back for a second season with a story that attempts to separate one man's true crime obsession from a motive for murder. Hey, Prime members, listen to the Amazon Music exclusive podcast, Suspect, Vanished in the Snow, in the Amazon Music app. Download the app today.
And this also leads to the question of whether anybody checked her pulse, specifically Jose Barrera. So the people who initially saw her, so remember, Jean has this aunt who's living with her, and some other people who initially saw her said that Tamla is laying on the ground with both arms at her side. So as we said, almost like she fell over like a tree being cut down. But when she's found by the police, her left arm is extended. It's sort of up and at an angle, cocked at an angle. One officer recorded in his report that Jose said he checked her pulse and in doing so moved her arm. But Jose would later say that he didn't check her pulse and that the report was quote unquote bullshit. I think it's pretty obvious he did. I think this goes back to the whole lying about the marijuana thing. At some point, everybody decided we don't need to have touched her. You know, at some point, people started asking questions. You got to imagine, this all starts off as an accident. Everybody thinks it's an accident. It's no big deal. But at some point, people start asking questions and people start getting concerned. And so their story starts changing to protect themselves. So Jose wants to be like, I wasn't anywhere near her. I didn't touch her at all. I think Jose probably did pick up her wrist to check her pulse, realized she's very dead. As we said in the 911 call, he says, or somebody says, I think it's Jean actually says, that she was stiff. And I think that happened. And it's just another thing that they are lying about in an attempt to sort of distance themselves from all of this. So, did she fall from the deck or not? So there was some confusion in the building about whether Tamla tripped on the border outside that bottom floor or fell from the elevated deck. One of the initial officers who came on the scene thought that she had fallen after tripping over the barrier because of those wounds on her lower legs, which were actually consistent with that. Moreover, there were stones in the backyard near her body that seemed to have come from the flower bed, which was covered in those small stones. So that's what the border is separating. It's separating the stones from the grass. And there were some of those stones out next to her body, as if you can imagine walking through the stones, kicking some of those stones into the grass, hitting the border, falling over. But when they did that autopsy that we talked about, all those wounds, like you don't have a tear in your heart from tripping over something and falling. That doesn't happen. You don't have all those multiple traumas. That doesn't happen. So the autopsy revealed it's far more likely that she fell from that upper porch, that deck, where she might have been smoking. And this confusion about where she fell from and how she fell is often cited in the investigation, and sort of figuring out how these things tie together and why they tie together and where the rocks come from. Why are the injuries the way they were is one of the great mysteries in this case.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, but I do think the laceration part, you know, we'll talk about our theories later, but if she did trip over that little border, that wasn't what killed her. She needed some much more high impact fall to cause what we saw in the autopsy. Now, one of the lead investigators, Mike Christian, later resigned from the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office due to questions about his personal conduct. Christian, who was married, was accused of having multiple affairs. Worse, he was accused of sharing confidential information with the women that he had affairs with. This included information about Tamla's case, and these included Snapchats that said the following: "Hello, sir. I know we've never met, but I'm here to tell you that your wife and the mother of your 6 children is dead. Oh, yes, I am happy to report that she was really, really drunk, landed face down in the backyard and either through hypothermia, positional asphyxia, or aspirated on her own puke. Not sure which one. I know you have fun memories. Enjoy corralling these 6 boys who are now going apeshit." That's pretty bad. Some other ones that he shared were, quote, "Greetings from racist cracker bastard murder covering up land. How are you?" Another one, "It's a nice rainy day, good for digging shallow graves by the roadside." Christian told the Georgia Bureau of Investigation he was convinced the death was an accident.
Yeah, and so obviously people looked at these statements and they've doubted his statement to the GBI, and they've wondered, how much can we trust this guy? Look, these are terrible things. He shouldn't have been saying these things. He certainly shouldn't have been saying these things to random women who are not part of the police force outside the cone of the investigation, right? Like, you shouldn't be sharing this kind of stuff. But I will say this, and this is not to excuse this. Everybody out there who works in medicine, everybody out there who's a firefighter, everybody out there who's a paramedic, and everybody out there who's a cop, you have said, maybe not things this bad, or you've heard people say things like this in your professions because they're highly stressful. They can lead to cynicism, and a lot of times people deal with that through some gallows humor that out in the public, you would be horrified if most people heard the things you said. And like I said, I'm not defending what he said, but when you read this, it also doesn't sound like somebody who's covering it up. When he says, "Greetings from racist cracker bastard murder covering up land," he's obviously making fun of the people who think that this is some sort of cover-up of a murder based on Tamla's race. So is this great? No. Is it surprising he had to resign? No. Is it really that significant in the greater scheme of this investigation? Probably not.
Yeah, it's like incredibly bad judgment. Like, so stupid for him to do this. I mean, he absolutely should have resigned, but he's not sharing evidence, and it shows that he just has incredibly poor judgment and shouldn't be an investigator for sure. But I don't necessarily think it tells us very much about the evidence in this case as to what happened.
It does lead me into the next part of this. And so the last part of this we're going to talk about before we get to the theories. We talked about the evidence in this case. There's not a ton of it. And we've basically laid that out for you. One thing people focus on a lot, and it's the thing we started with, is sort of the racial history of Cummings, the racial history of Forsyth County, and how much does it matter. And I'll just go ahead and tell you, what happened in 1917 in Forsyth County has no bearing on this investigation. It is a substantive matter. You'll never convince me that these ladies invited Tamla over to their party so that they could murder her in some sort of race-fueled rage, right? I don't believe that happened. And the fact of the matter is, wherever you live, if you look back 100 years, you're going to find some really disturbing, terrible, racist stuff that happened. And it doesn't matter where you are, you're going to find it. If you're in California, you're going to find, all sorts of things towards Asians. Oregon was started as some sort of paradise for white settlers and prohibited the immigration of African Americans for forever. Obviously in the South, very obvious the problems you're going to have there. But if it's Detroit or Boston, Boston to this day struggles with all sorts of racial issues. You're going to find that. But that doesn't matter that a murder in 2022 is somehow influenced by that. I don't believe that, and I don't think that's what happened. But, and this goes to what this guy did, and this is something that I think everybody in law enforcement has to remember. The reason this is significant is because it makes people doubt the police. It makes people doubt the investigation, and it makes people assume that there's some sort of corruption. And when you combine the racial history and some of the terrible things that happened in Georgia at the time, and you bring in these statements by Mike Christian, you can understand why people question this, and you can understand why people doubt it. And one thing that I think all of us in law enforcement recognize, hopefully, is that we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard. We can't be doing stuff like Mike Christian did, even if this was blowing off steam, even if it was gallows humor, even if this was how he dealt with some of the horrible things he had to see, including the mother of 6 children dead in a backyard. We cannot be doing this because this is why it is harder and harder to prosecute cases. We see it every day. We see every day juries do not believe the police as much as they used to because they think the police are biased. They assume they're lying. They assume they'd be willing to plant evidence. And in our experience, that is 100% not true. The vast majority of the police are good, honest, hardworking people who put their lives on the line every day and know that they may never come home, but they're willing to do it. And the ones who turn out to be corrupt, they get pushed out or they have findings against them that mean they could never actually be used as a witness. we have ways of dealing with that, but that doesn't change the public perception. And I think that's something we just have to remember. And I think it's something you can't ignore in cases like this because it's the reason so many people have questions.
Yeah, I think that was really well said, Brett. And I think it's important to talk about race here because people have raised it. And it's, it is stark that she is the only African-American woman as part of the group. But I think it would do a disservice to cases in which race really was a motivating factor for the crime if we lumped this one in there, because there's just no indication that race played any part in what happened to Tamla here. And we're about to go into our theories. But based on what is here and what's investigated and what we can tell, even from the evidence that we do have, it's not clear to me that race played a part in any potential crime here. And that partly goes to whether we think this was a crime at all, which is why we delved into this case in the first place. So with that said, let's go ahead and talk about the theories. What people, the great debate of whether this was a murder or whether this was just a really unfortunate accident. So let's start with murder. Now, even though I just spieled and said there's not enough evidence to know that race played any part in this, we just don't really know much about what happened that night, because what we do know is that the stories told by the people at the party just do not all ring true. They don't ring true with each other. They don't ring true with how social dynamics work and how you would see these situations play out in a social setting. What we do know is that these people were loosely affiliated socially, but they did not have some deep, strong ties. These were not people who were part of like a Bible study for years together. They were part of a sorority, or they had, been family friends for a long time. They were all loosely affiliated and they got together to have fun. But those kinds of situations could actually cover up maybe something much more sinister. It could very well be that there was a group of moms. Maybe one of Tamla's sons had picked on or bullied another person's son. And for whatever reason, they may have just had a bone to pick with Tamla. And so maybe this group of moms thought, let's just mess with her when she gets invited to this party. Maybe when we've been saying that this group of women didn't know each other that well, maybe that's not totally true. Maybe everyone knew each other pretty well except for Tamla. And Tamla didn't realize that everyone else was close except for her. Maybe she was the one outsider. Maybe it had nothing to do with race. Maybe it did. But maybe these women, they didn't want to murder her technically, but they had a bone to pick with her. They didn't like her. She had a bunch of sons, and they were going to come one after another in these football teams, and they weren't going to be rid of her anytime soon. She was probably going to outlast them on the team, and they were annoyed with it. Maybe it was something as simple as a coach favoring her sons over the other kids for playing time. And whatever it was, they got out of hand, and they just wanted to either bully her or, more sinister, they did intend her great harm. And when things got too far, they couldn't pull it back. They couldn't get in trouble. These are a bunch of suburban moms with good jobs and good families that they couldn't risk not going all the way and just ending her life so that she couldn't come back and tell some story. And instead, they would all cover for each other, which is what we see. We don't really know much about what happened because everyone's stories are kind of vague and somewhat in support of we have no idea what happened. So maybe it was that she rubbed someone the wrong way and we just cannot know because no one has really been upfront, and we don't have any evidence really for murder, but we also don't have any evidence against it. But what we do know is that she suffered incredibly traumatic injuries to her body that caused her death. We do know that she brought tequila to share with everyone, and no one drank that tequila except for her. We know that she did stand out. Whether she smoked marijuana by herself or not, she was the only one who smoked cigarettes. So maybe this was all a setup, making sure she got really drunk and really high, and it would be kind of a perfect crime that they could stage, that it looked like she fell off the porch in her drunken high state. And these suburban moms had, the thrill of a lifetime.
And just listen to Alice tell that story. It's like Alice should be a Hollywood screenplay writer, right? I mean, you can imagine that episode of Law and Order or I Know What You Did Last Summer Part 4, where this is all some sort of plot. Or, I mean, and that's the thing, when you hear people talk about this case, that's how they present it. They don't present it as, you know, Jose tried to rape her and then murdered her. It's always presented as if everyone there was involved in the cover-up, that everybody there has sort of a code of silence that they're adhering to, and they killed this woman and have gotten away with it. And I just want to point out, one lady couldn't get away with giving people Xanax. The police figured that out the next day after she told them that. You know, the idea that there is some conspiracy of silence here amongst everybody who was there is just, it's just wild. It's just wild. And I know there are people who believe that, but I want you to listen to what Alice said again. Rewind, listen to it again. It's a great story. There's no way that happened.
And Brett, and that's the thing, right? I don't believe what I just said. I tried really hard to give the best theory possible, but every theory I went through in my head to say out loud sounded like some story, some movie that you would watch and not reality. Even what I said, I tried my best to be convincing. I couldn't convince myself.
Yeah, look, there are weird things about this case. And once again, I think the police very quickly decided this was an accident. And when they decided that, they didn't do as much as you would like. They didn't take as many pictures as you would like. People talk about that a lot. There's just not a lot of pictures in the scene. There's not a lot of pictures of Tamla. There wasn't a whole lot of investigation done here because it was very obvious to them this was an accident. It's kind of like Ellen Greenberg, where they come in, they think it's a suicide. The difference between this case and Ellen's case is there was a lot of evidence afterwards that really made you question the suicide theory. Might still have been a suicide, but there was a lot of questions. Really, the only thing you have here, the only evidence you even have that kind of points to murder are all these injuries. And it's like, how did these injuries happen? And I think when you start thinking about that, I do think there is a theory that fits everything. It is not the theory that she fell from the deck, that she was sitting on the deck rail and flipped over and fell to her death. I do not think that is what happened. And you may be saying, well, then how could this be? Because we already know she had to have fallen from a height to have these injuries. So here is my theory. And if you are able, I want you to take a look at this photograph of the back of this building. And I will tell you, when I looked at this, the first thing that stood out to me is the staircase. The stairway that goes down from the deck to the porch below. It's sort of a weird one. We don't have a good picture of it because, once again, they didn't take very many good pictures. But there is this stairway leading down. And unlike some of the other stairways that you can actually see from one of the other pictures, which come off the deck in sort of a normal way, which is there's sort of a gap in the railing and a stairway that leads down. This one is not like that. It actually leads inward. So it goes down, and instead of going outward from the deck, it goes inward. And I think the reason for that is because the building is pretty close to the building beside it. There's a fence. Having that sort of leading away stairway didn't really work. So there's an interior stairway here that leads down. And I think what happened is she went out there that night, and she was going to smoke, and for whatever reason, she went over to where that stairway was, and she fell down the stairs. I think she fell down the stairs. She was very drunk. She couldn't really brace herself or stop her fall. She broke her wrist. She had multiple wounds to her head. She's hitting over and over and over in this sort of really violent way without any way to stop herself. She ends up on the ground. She now has all sorts of injuries to her head. She's got this injury to her heart. Blood is on her brain. Blood is on her heart. But she's not dead yet. She manages to get up. She stumbles into that gravel area. She kicks some stones into the grass. She hits that barrier. When she hits the barrier, she trips over it. And when she does, she injures her shins. And because she's both very drunk and at this point very injured, she doesn't even put her hands up. She falls face first into the grass, and that's where she ends up being found the next day. I think this is the most likely explanation. It explains the injuries. It explains how she could end up in that position having fallen, which would be really hard to do from the deck, to fall flat like that. It explains the stones. It explains the wounds on her shins. It explains everything about the scene that up to that point was inexplicable. Because I have to say this, we create these outlines weeks ahead of when we record, and then we record weeks ahead of when we're going to do the show. And in between the writing the outline and the recording, I was listening to Cold Case Murder Mysteries, which, as you guys know, is one of my favorite podcasts, which a lot of you hate, but that's fine. It's just, not everybody has the same taste. And Ryan comes out with a Tamla Horsford episode. And I'm like, oh, this is exciting. I get to see what he thinks. And man, if he didn't come to the same conclusion, I was shocked, because we never come to the same conclusions. But he comes to the exact same conclusion about the staircase and everything, not to ruin it for you. He has a few different takes on exactly how he thinks it happened, but essentially the same thing, that she fell down that staircase. And that's what I think happened. And it's unfortunate. I think if the police had done a little bit more investigation and really looked into that and really tried to figure out exactly how the accident happened, they might have seen evidence of that, and they might have been able to say that definitively. They didn't do that. So this is just a theory. It'll never be proven. But I think that is what happened.
Yeah, but I do think this was an accident. I don't think this is a mass conspiracy murder cover-up. And the falling down the staircase actually is pretty consistent with the multiple blunt injuries, blunt trauma to the head. And it boggles my mind why she would have fallen over the railing from the top floor unless she was standing up there, which is a strange thing. You would think she'd have some, I don't know, some tendency either towards wanting to end her life or thinking she could fly at that point to be standing up there. But I think you would find her in a much more contorted position, because she would have probably, I don't know, landed on her head, cracked her neck, something along those lines, and then her body would have slumped over where it fell. Whereas if it happened as you suggest, the stumbling forward would make sense why she fell face forward. I think I said this before, but in college I was pledge mom of my sorority, which really just meant I was designated driver, which was very needed. And I'm very glad that we had enough foresight to do that at all these fraternity parties we went to. So all to say is I drove home a lot of girls who were blackout drunk and way, way, way overserved, and they should never have been that drunk. And I was completely sober in these situations because I was helping them back to their rooms, or in some cases to the clinic or the hospital in really bad cases. And when they are at blackout levels, these girls that I helped would be complete rag dolls. I would quite literally have to drag them on the ground to the car because I could not get them to use their legs. And oftentimes I would find them face down on the floor of a party. They haven't moved. That's the way they fell down, trying to walk, and they stayed there even though their face was smashed against the floor, because they can feel nothing and they are completely passed out and blacked out. By the way, if you're going to college, don't do that. It is not fun. It's a terrible way to live. And, please do not do that. And if you're going to go out and drink like that, I don't know, maybe go talk to someone, and definitely have a good friend who will bring you home. All to say is I've seen this happen a lot of times, and it's not always on purpose. You don't always mean to get blackout drunk. Tamla, I don't think she necessarily was a big partier or even meant to get high or drunk that night. But, all she does is take care of her family. Before she left, she was preparing breakfast for her kids the next morning. She probably doesn't drink very often because she's always at football practice for her kids, or driving them around, or preparing meals for them, doing laundry, being really a mom of the year. And so her tolerance probably wasn't even that high, and she was just wanting to have a good time and didn't realize how much tequila she had that night, and how that may have interacted with what she thought was a completely harmless Xanax. Because who isn't anxious at age 40 with, 6 kids and just a lot going on in life? And it was just a perfect storm. I don't think she meant to set out to get to the state that she was at. So I don't think this is a situation where we're blaming her that she got there, but she did get to that place. And I don't think it would be fair to tell her story as if it were some big conspiracy murder, when it seems pretty clear that this was a horrible, horrible, tragic accident. And if anything we take from it, it's that always be looking out for people around you. Whether you think that you're supposed to be in the position to look out for them or not, be there for them. It doesn't matter if you are going to be that, killjoy at the party, but this was an extreme circumstance. But what if someone had stepped in and taken that tequila bottle away from her, or while she was FaceTiming her family that night and just maybe mentioned to her husband, hey, maybe, maybe we're all going home tonight instead of all staying, so that she could go home and sleep it off. To step in for someone when you see a situation like that happening. So many times we see that really tragic situations may have had a different outcome if someone just said something uncomfortable to speak the truth of what they were seeing.
And let me just say this. Number one, I want to echo everything Al said. We got to look out for each other. We all do dumb things. We all make mistakes. We all screw up. And part of being a friend, it's easy to be a friend. It's kind of like when you get married and you have that whole in sickness and in health, thing. It's all like in the good times and the bad times. It's easy to be a friend when everything's great, right? It's hard to be a friend when things are bad. And when you see somebody who is obviously engaging in self-destructive behavior, you need to help them out. And I'll just say this. You may not agree with us. You may think this is murder. If you do, though, you have to deal with this. You cannot hand wave this away, which is what I read a lot of stuff. I listened to a lot of stuff on this. And the consistent thing from people who think this is murder is they hand wave this away. And let me just say, if she was murdered, it was because she was really, really drunk and somebody tried to take advantage of her. And even through her drunkenness, she was able to fight back a little bit and they killed her. Like that would be the kind of scenario. What didn't happen here is she wasn't drunk. And people who are like, well, but everybody said she was fine, so she must have been fine. No, she was very drunk. And the other thing I think people need to remember, and I will dig into my great store of drunken stories for this. During college, not a surprise, I think, for most of you, that I drank a lot in college. Never blacked out a single time in college because I was really good at drinking in college. I had a really high tolerance. I really had a feel for how much I could drink. I was able to drink a lot and get pretty drunk, but never black out. Never happened. The only times I've ever blacked out are in situations where one time, and I've told this story, one time I gave up alcohol for Lent and there was a party right after Lent. That was a mistake, right? That was the first time I ever blacked out. The only times I've ever blacked out are in situations like this, where I'm in a place where I'm celebrating with people. Maybe I haven't seen them in a long time. Maybe it's a big deal, whatever. And I'm drinking a lot more than I normally do. And because of that, I don't have a sense for things. And I will tell you, alcohol is such a dangerous drug because you can take a shot after shot after shot after shot and feel absolutely fine. And then all of a sudden you take the next one and it's like you're out. It just hits you like a ton of bricks. And you can imagine that happening with her, where she was fine. And people saw her and she was fine. But then as that alcohol starts to be absorbed into your blood and processed, the effect on you is getting greater and greater and greater. And she walks out on that deck and it's all hitting her. It's all hitting her, and all of a sudden she's stumbling. And all of a sudden she can barely hold the cigarette. And she's sort of wandering around the deck and she doesn't even notice the stairs and she falls down them. Or she decides stupidly, because she's not thinking, because she's so drunk, to lift herself up on that railing and flips over it and dies. I mean, you can imagine how that happened. And if you think it's murder, you have to address that, because the facts don't lie. Not only was she drunk, but she had taken 2 different forms of substances that would have increased the effect of the alcohol. And it is really hard to believe, even with not a whole lot of evidence to tell us what happened, it's really hard to believe that didn't have an impact there. And I think the best thing we can do, like Alice said, if you want to respect her and you want to remember her, she didn't do anything that a lot of people hadn't done. No, nobody's blaming her. This is not a, how dare she drank so much. This is very normal. This is ordinary. And if the people at that party have any blame, it's that they didn't look out for her. And that's why I think you see the lying. They engaged in the same stuff. They didn't look out for her, and she ended up dead, and they feel guilty about it. Not because they murdered her, but because nobody was there for her when she obviously had a little too much to drink. So don't be that person. Be there for your friends, even if they're not friends you know very well. And I think that's the best thing you can take away from this case. I know you guys have a lot of thoughts, and we want to hear from you. So shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. Shoot us an email, look us up on Reddit, join the gallery on Facebook, leave a comment on the YouTube video if you're watching there. If you want to get all your episodes early and ad-free, join our Patreon. Our lowest tier is like $3, so you can do that. And we also occasionally will have live episodes.
I actually think we have a Patreon who's like 50 cents. So really there's no floor.
There's really no floor because we're terrible at this. So, give a penny, get everything for free. So, but thank you guys so much for supporting the show. You're the reason we continue to do this. Your reviews, your messages, telling a friend, it's so important. I want to challenge you as we have in the past. Leave that review or just tell a friend. If everybody who listens to this gets one person to listen, that'd be a lot of people. And we'd love to have that. And I think that's all I have. Alice, do you have anything else you want to add tonight?
No, I mean, I really do love looking at these types of cases that cause so much controversy as to whether it's a murder or an accident, because I think that ongoing question, when I think the evidence is so clear that it's not a crime, is necessary for the family to hear. Because, I mean, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, their mom, their wife, their sister, their friend is gone, and it's horrendous. But to have that added, stress and just tragedy surrounding it, if you think it might be some big conspiracy murder, just does such a huge disservice to the family, when I just don't think the evidence points in that direction.
And that's such a good point, because we forget that. We talk about this a lot. We all have fun with this. We enjoy looking at mysteries and trying figuring them out. But there's a real person at the heart of this, and there are real victims beyond Tamla. Her family are victims too. And they're struggling to figure out what happened. And if this wasn't murder, it is not doing them a favor to keep pushing that it is. Because all that means is that despite 2 investigations that say it was an accident, they still have a doubt. And the not knowing is bad, maybe not as bad as what happened, but it's bad because it lingers. You can't let it go. You can't move on because you don't know, and you want justice for your family member. It's a very natural thing. So, I mean, I think it's really important. And this is what we always say. You may not agree with us, but we will never lie to you, and we will never tell you something that's not what we actually think, because we just don't believe in doing it that way. So you may not agree with us on this one, but this is how we see it. And it would be nice if that's what happened. If it was an accident, which I 100% believe it was, it would be nice if everybody could come together on that so that Tamla could have some peace and so that her family could have some peace. Well, that's all we have for this one, but we will be back next week with a new case that is equally tragic, unfortunately. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors.
Really tall lights, like outside of your house. You know what I'm talking about? Like ours is like, we're gonna need a bucket truck or something.
I know. I was about to say, you hire someone to change those.
Yeah. But it's like, how much is it gonna cost to get like one person to come over and change one light bulb? While you're up there, do you mind just like, I don't know, doing a paint job or something?
Yeah. Can I get a new roof?
Yeah, can I get a new roof? Why not? Okie dokie. Let's see. My sound normal? Is my sound normal? That looks kind of normal. Okay. Wait. Is it normal? That looks weird. Let's see. Is this normal? Normal. Yeah, it's normal. Okay. You're on speaker.
Testing.
Get around for Halloween with Pluto TV's 31 Nights of Horror. All month long, Pluto TV is bringing you the best Halloween movies, shows, and more. Watch classic horror movies like The Grudge or The Blair Witch Project, or scream along with your favorite stars like Ryan Reynolds in Life. Pluto TV has hundreds of channels with thousands more movies and TV shows. The best part, it's so free it's chilling. No credit card, no sign up, no fees. Download the Pluto TV app on all your favorite devices and start screaming now.